Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Before we dive in, I want to go through the fine print and share how we can work together. Because healing from this kind of pain takes a lot more than time. It takes the right kind of support. I work with people entangling themselves from emotionally abusive relationships, coercive control, trauma bonds, high conflict co-parenting dynamics, high conflict divorce, and if you're at the beginning of the road and wondering what divorce would look like. I offer one-on-one coaching at every stage. If you're still in the relationship, if you're unsure if it's abuse, if you know it's abuse but you're having trouble understanding what that looks like, or what to do with it, I can help you name what's happening, start setting boundaries that work for you, and figure out what you need. If you're thinking about leaving, we'll explore what that might look like in a grounded and personalized way. If you're navigating divorce or custody or co-parenting with a high conflict person, I can help you document, strategize, and stay emotionally anchored, especially when you're being gaslit, discredited, and re-traumatized by the legal system. If you've already left and you're stuck in the trauma bond, or if you've been discarded and struggling to feel like yourself again, I can help you rebuild self-trust and reconnect with your own nervous system in a way that actually feels doable. Everything I do is highly personalized. I don't walk you through a one-size-fits-all program. I listen, I reflect, and I guide you based on what you're facing right now. And some people work with me through a one-time validation call, which is offered on my website, where we zero in on one issue you're struggling with and start to untangle it together. Others work with me on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending on what's going on in your specific situation. And this is especially helpful when healing from emotional abuse and also in divorce. If you're curious about starting, I offer a $25 intro call, which if you listen to my older episodes, I call it a clarity call. It did used to be free, and I talk about it at a later episode, but really a lot of people were no-showing to those calls, and that was taking away time from clients that I do work one-on-one with. And so if we move forward, I just take that fee and apply it to your first session. That intro call is just for us to get on the same page so you can share what's going on for you and I can share how I might be able to help. I only take a limited number of those calls per month because one-on-one coaching is the core of my work. Out of all these offerings that I have, one-on-one coaching is the thing that I do the most, and I do it 6 days a week most of the time, 5 to 6 days a week. And so if my calendar looks full and if there's not a time that you can get in, you can email me at jessica@jessicaknightcoaching.com, and I always try and make space where I can. And I may also always have a few openings from one-on-one client reschedules. You can also explore self-paced courses and toolkits at jessicaknight.thinkific.com, including Divorcing a Narcissist 101 and the Emotional Abuse Breakthrough course. I have a documentation course and my new signature program, Unhooked, which is a private podcast and course that walks you through the full cycle of abuse, helps you map it in your relationship and how to break it and how to begin to see what it really is that you're going through. If you want ongoing support in a more flexible way, you could always check out my Substack at jessicaknight.substack.com. Each month I focus on a different theme, from trauma bonding to divorce to cluster B to sexual coercion to emotional abuse to toxic breakups. Those are just some from this year. Paid members get access to monthly deep dives, master classes, Q&As, strategy kits, and I'm working on some more group options. There is also a free option and a monthly option. So please head over to Substack. The link is in my show notes. You also can just search Jessica Knight Coaching and I'll come up. Everything that I create is meant to help. My coaching, my writing, my courses, this podcast, it's built around the one truth that you're not crazy. You are conditioned to doubt your reality, and I want to help you change that and understand what you're going through. If you like this podcast, the best thing that you can do is subscribe and rate the episode 5 stars. You can find me on my websites, emotionalabusecoach.com and high-conflict divorcecoaching.com. All of the offerings that I just mentioned are also in the show notes below. Now let's get to the episode. Today, Dr. Kerry McAvoy is back on the podcast. If you've been following me for a while, you might remember our earlier episode that focused on healing through community, one that so many of you wrote in about, and there was also one about her book, Love You More. Kerry is a retired psychologist, a survivor of a deeply abusive relationship, and the author of, like I said, Love You More. She's also the founder of the Toxic Free Relationship Club, where she offers ongoing coaching, education, and support for survivors of narcissistic abuse. This episode is a big one. We talk about capacity, what it actually means when someone doesn't have the ability to change, reflect, or truly connect in a healthy way. And then we go deep into the world of cluster B personality disorders, especially narcissism, antisocial traits, and borderline dynamics. Kerry helps us understand how each one shows up, how splitting happens, and why even genuine remorse doesn't always lead to actual change. We also talk about how people with cluster B traits can mirror what they think you want, and why the healthy version of them might have never actually existed, and the emotional exhaustion of trying to prove that you're enough to someone with low receptive capacity. This is a really honest, really layered conversation, and I really think that you're going to get a lot out of it. Kerry is also relaunching her podcast on August 18th. And so if you are looking for more of a psychological deep dive into a lot of these concepts, I really recommend looking into it. The link will be in the show notes. Hi, Kerry. Thank you again for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back on. I really always love being a guest, and thank you.
I love having you. And people really love our episodes, actually. At this point, it's probably a year ago, if not a little longer, for the last one that we did. And I still get people that write in saying that it was really helpful. Especially, it was about community and like how they, how the importance of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering, just to start, if you could introduce you and what you do.
Sure. I'm a retired psychologist. I closed my practice in 2015. And then since then I made a big shift. In 2015, I lost my husband of 31 years to cancer. And then shortly after that, got into a very toxic relationship, a sociopath, actually. I'm sorry. I've actually concluded Dr. Ramani personally told me, Kerry, he's not a sociopath. He's a psychopath. Come on. You know that. Yeah. So I got into a relationship with a psychopath, spent 2 years, I knew 3, married 2, but then extricated myself, or circumstances got me out. That's the truth of the matter, because it felt so dangerous that circumstances helped get me out. But I extricated myself from an extremely dangerous situation where probably my life was at threat. And since then, I have really dedicated myself to understanding cluster B personality disorders, but more specifically with a greater attention to narcissism as well as antisocial personality disorders, just because we don't understand them and they're so harmful when we get into a relationship with them. But all the cluster Bs are extremely, very toxic. But since then, I've written a book called Love You More, and I also am now on social media. So at Kerry McAvoy, PhD, and I have a website, kerrymcavoyphd.com, where I offer a lot of resources and support to survivors of narcissistic abuse.
Oh, yeah. Kerry, are you still running the community?
The toxic free. Yeah, it's bigger than ever now. Now we have nearly daily coaching sessions for those who are members of the community called Toxic Free Relationship Club. We now have 2 co-hosts, and we offer like rounding support every week, book club. We bringing in quarterly now special events. Like we just had Michelle Locke, who is an associate judge in Texas, come and take questions. for our club members. So it's just an incredible experience. We have somebody now coming in, I think in September, who'll be speaking on coercive control. So what there was now or before is just really expanded into something much larger since then.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll share the link to that in the show notes. So anybody that's interested can go check that out.
Oh, I'd love that. And please know anybody who's interested at the premier level, that's the next to the top tier, which I think is the best value. I always offer financial support to anyone who asks. So if someone thinks that's what they need, please just reach out and let me know. I will be happy to work something out with them.
Yeah, that's really good to know too, because I do get people for individual coaching that then decide maybe they can't afford it or it's not that's not the right fit. And I don't have a community like that right now because I'm doing a lot of the one-on-one. And so, but what I would be more than happy to send people actually to you into that community because that's probably exactly what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to share it in the show notes, but I also will let people know.
All right. Thank you so much for that.
Of course. And so what we're going to talk about today and what you just touched on the intro is that, really understanding the cluster Bs, and what's going on, because I think, you and I found ourselves in relationships and then we're like, what is going on? Like, this isn't normal. But then we start using our normal brains and our normal way of processing to try and understand something that we don't understand. Like, you obviously understood a lot more being a psychologist, but for me, and probably for a lot of survivors, it's like, what is going on? Because you just think like, this is crazy or I'm crazy. Somebody has to be crazy if this is what's going on.
Well, and then they say you're the crazy one because you're having a reaction, which makes you feel even crazier. And it makes you wonder if you are the one because they don't seem, a lot of them. No, I take that back. The histrionic as well as the borderline personality disorder is going to act very dramatic and over the top and very emotional. Mm-hmm. But the antisocial personality disorder as well as the narcissistic personality disorder is not. They're going to be so calm and almost remote, maybe feel withdrawn and certainly collected, and they'll make you feel even crazier as a result of that. So I think that the histrionic and the borderline personality disorder will make you feel guilty a lot, but I think the other two will make you feel crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And that you find yourself trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Yeah. And then when you go on to research, or Google these things or read things on narcissism, because that's the one that I think is talked about still the most on social media, you see they're not going to change. And then you get stuck in that cycle of like, how or why wouldn't they, or what do they not see? And I'm wondering if there's a psychological reason or an answer to that, like why they won't change. Because like for me, I remember telling myself, he's not going to change because he doesn't want to, and he doesn't see that there's a problem.
Yeah, it's tricky because the more we understand about these conditions, the more they realize that their neurology is playing a massive role in this. Mm-hmm. There is a wonderful article, and I'd have to find it, but it's in Nature. Nature actually put up brain scans comparing a narcissistic brain against a normal person's brain. And you can see where the activity is massively different. There's different areas are being lit up that then cause different kinds of behaviors. So I know one of the big questions we all want to know is this nature or nurture. And lately I've been focusing a little bit more on that. And I have found to my shock that upwards to 50 or more % of their characteristics are heritable. Mm-hmm. That they're strongly nature-based, not just nurture. We previously wanted to say that this was related to upbringing, which then begs the question of if it's upbringing, then can it be changed? Because can you kind of mollify the environment so they end up being a different person? But when this is hardwired, when there's actually structural differences, you're not talking about massive changes. You're talking more about learned behavior, resisting natural impulses, but you're not going to massively overhaul somebody. Now, that may mean that there's going to be more hope someday down the line when we have the ability to correct things at a molecular level. But right now, we're talking more of a behavioral level, and that makes it harder.
Right. And I think it also it causes people that have been through trauma, to say, well, I'm not abusing people in my life, or actually it makes me feel really guilty, or it makes me feel very empathetic, or, and so it creates so many questions too, if we just talk about the nurture aspect.
Yeah, exactly. Because that was the previous thought. I know it was really popular on social media to think. In fact, it caused us to be sympathetic to think, oh, this is trauma based. These people can't help it. We just need to give them better understanding. I'll tell you honestly, Jessica, if I could have changed him, I would have, because
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
couldn't have found a more supportive person. I'm a psychologist. I really stepped up and stepped in to try to provide the right environment, the right, to hold myself back, not to was I overreacting? I didn't even react. I mean, here I am being massively betrayed, having basically somebody perform Harry Carey on me, drag my guts across the floor based on its behavior. And I was calm and collected, and I was polite and supportive. And yet this didn't make anything different. And if anything, he got more devious and more bold, I think. So yeah, if I could have changed him, I'm convinced I probably would have, but he wasn't open to change. He didn't want to change. This person had become entrenched and really had sold himself on the idea that he was entitled to these things, that he was a superior person and that he had a right to the acting out the way that he did.
Yeah, yeah. And from reading your book, it also sounded like as you were so understanding and you were setting boundaries, and then he was getting more creative in the manipulation. So it was like he was changing in the opposite way.
Yeah.
That the like, how do I be a better partner? It was more devious.
Yes, it was. Yeah. And I don't know, it'd be interesting if I could see what really actually happened. I don't know everything that happened in that relationship at all. I'm blind to a lot of it. But if I could have compared his early behavior to his late behavior, I wonder how much better he got at being deceptive. I'm sure he was busy training himself on how to hide things in a more sophisticated way. And then this is the other part. We make the assumption, survivors do, that when we question someone and put them on the spot, that there's going to be something that compels that person to be truthful. I mean, because the average person, if you think about it for a moment, the average neurotic person on the street is insecure. And our goal is we really want relationships to be viable. We have an investment. We are loyal to you, and we're loyal to the relationship, and we're loyal to ourselves in that context of the relationship. So we have each other's backs, so to speak. So when somebody comes to you and confronts you about, say, maybe you did do something you shouldn't have done. Maybe you were sneaky about it. You feel shame, and you probably feel some guilt about it. And when they confront you, your bias is going to be, I want to repair this relationship. What happens with these individuals, though, their bias is not to repair the relationship. So when somebody's wanting to repair the relationship, they usually come clean. Maybe not on the first ask, but if you pressed, they would say, okay, yes, I did do it. I feel so bad. I know you know what I'm saying? They would have done that.
Yeah.
But these individuals don't do that. They double down. And they do it so convincingly. And then they start to accuse you. They'll do Darvo, accuse you of then somehow victimizing them by asking, which is what Darvo means, is that you deny it, you attack the other person, and you become victimized by the fact this person has an issue with you, that you then walk away and say, I must have made it up. It can't be true. I mean, they set this, it feels so real. Their reaction was so authentic that somehow then I must be the one that's got this all wrong. I know I did that a lot. And what's hard is that, no, that's just better lying. They're very good at lying.
Yeah. And continuing to like twist it, and then you twist you into a spiral. And I have gotten a lot more clients recently because I've done a few episodes on borderline, because then I remember I reached out to you about a relationship probably about a year and a half ago or so, that it ended, and it ended in such a weird way. I didn't know borderlines discarded.
They do.
Yeah. Because we hear about it with, but it looks different than a narcissistic one.
It does. Right? Usually they ghost you.
Yeah. And the blame shift was he definitely had covert narcissism, vulnerable narcissism and borderline. I remember trying to articulate at the time to you, all these emotional outbursts that were happening, and that all pointed back at me. And so and there was so much I knew. I was like, okay, I'm not responsible for his trauma. He definitely has a lot that he should be working on, and was in therapy, but I think he was in therapy talking about me, or my trauma, or where I'm like, that's my stuff. We have we have a couples therapist talk about this, but in retrospect now, I would have never known while I was going through it that this person likely has a lot of borderline traits, because he seems like he's so obsessed with me. Right. But it's every single thing I did that was for myself,
it was, even if it was like, I am spending the day alone with my daughter, it was a personal attack on his entire being. And I needed to repent for all of my sins forever.
Right.
What are some of the qualities of borderline that you think come out in relationships or that people notice in relationships?
I say that sounds very borderline-ish to me, what you just described.
Yeah.
That
I'm sure I have like 3,000 more examples.
Oh, geez, no, it sounds so. The way I was trained to understand borderline dynamics, and I think it still holds up even after all these years, because I had a heavy dose of this in graduate school, was one of the areas I was very fascinated by. Even though it's now considered a biosocial problem, just like narcissism and antisocial personality disorders are, it does present very, very differently. And there is an implication of trauma. I mean, trauma does, I think they're thinking now that, and I was talking to Dr. Peter Salerno about this, that borderline personality disorders may be vulnerably linked to trauma in the same way that autism is vulnerably linked to trauma, which if you would like me to explain what that means, I'd be happy to, which ramps up and worsens the symptoms. So they think there's a set of preconditioned factors in a person that makes you vulnerable to this genetically. Okay. And then your environment sort of activates or emphasizes and worsens the condition, and trauma worsens the condition. But at its root core is two twin fears. And you'll see this come up in the relationship. So it really gets worked out in a relationship. The twin fears are abandonment and engulfment. Mm-hmm. And both of them is a form of a self-annihilation. So if you think of it in infancy, if someone walks out on a baby, says, "Good luck, I hope you make it," the baby is going to die. Mm-hmm. And that is an existential fear that's hardwired into all of us. We fear abandonment. We don't want to, even as an adult, we know, okay, so we survive like Tom Hanks on an island. It's not the best case, but it's survivable, not maybe preferable, maybe not even with your sanity, but you can do that. But as an infant or a toddler, you could not. And so we know that. So we really want to avoid it at all levels. So we all have a fear of abandonment. I know those listening may think, well, I fear that, then am I a borderline? Well, we all have that fear. Right. But for borderlines, it's at another level to where any kind of rupture, like gap or lapse in the relationship, like you focusing on your daughter as an example, mm-hmm. may feel like, not to every borderline, but to those who are more sensitive in this direction, may feel like a breach, like a betrayal of sorts. And then what happens is they become extremely emotionally dysregulated. That's what you experience, is all this collapsing and falling apart, all this drama that happened, and assuming of the worst. And they move, it's like they fall into the deep end of all their worst fears and then act them out with you. And the same goes with engulfment. Engulfment is, every person wants to feel respected, like I'm my own person and I get to pick my own clothes out and I get to choose my own activities. And if you came in and start saying, no, you have to wear this and you have to do this and mm-hmm. you can only eat this, then I would start to feel like me as a person is becoming invisible, like I'm dying, psychologically mm-hmm. dying. And they're also sensitive to that too. So here's the interesting part. They don't typically are vulnerable to both ends. They typically have a vulnerability to one more than another. So in your case, it sounds like this person was very sensitive to any rupture, any loss or separation or withdrawal felt like threat to him, and he would then get very, very dysregulated. Somebody else, it might be that you just like, can I help you? Wait, are you trying to take over? You're trying, saying that would experience your move towards them, your mm-hmm. offer of help suddenly as incredibly intrusive, and then accuse you of attacking them and doing all sorts of horrible things to them. So the key piece, though, is similar to both, whether regardless they're what they're sensitive to, is emotional destabilization. They're emotionally destabilized really fast, and they don't know how to regulate well. They mm-hmm. they kind of lose themselves in this almost this paranoid fear that gets going.
That's exactly what would happen, and it would be a lot of times where like we were like connected, like so say we had a good day or something like that, and like and then it would be like, okay, like, oh, great. I was great. I can't wait to see you tomorrow, whatever. And then it would come back again. Yeah. It was like this big injury of like, but I'm going to miss you so much. I'm like, we literally were together all day, and like, for me, I'm like, I need my space. I need to clear my head. For him, it was the opposite.
Well, you didn't say goodbye, right? Or, yeah.
Right. Or we didn't have sex before you left. And so now, and I'm,
Right.
well, I don't want to, and I can't right now. So I'm going,
Yeah.
But
And
then,
then it's taken as like you're rejecting him because you hate him, and it
yeah.
goes into this big thing. Yes.
Well, and then it actually goes into a very big emotional outburst, this is where probably like the thing I started to connect to borderline is it was your everything rooted back to that abandonment in some way. And the outburst would be so big, they'd be so like, it would be a temper tantrum,
Yeah.
like even crying. And I would get so overwhelmed because I would just think like I'm not suited to deal with this. Like I don't want to. And like when you mentioned they become so dysregulated, it was like in that moment, I am the villain to him and he is right. And now I'm not taking care of his trauma, but it's actually activating a trauma response in me, the
Yeah.
whole time of like now having to caretake somebody's feelings. And I honestly, I didn't like, there was not one time that I did because I was like, wow, I don't want to do this. But it became really hard to leave because of that, because I think I have some clients where they feel like the borderline, it's like the whole relationship gets thrown on the table at the drop of a hat.
Mm-hmm.
You abandoned me because you didn't want to get dinner with me tonight. Like, you must hate me, and then what are you left doing? Caretaking something because you're like, I just have work today, or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the other piece is that effort, that request for caretaking, which they can claim if they know anything about Gottman's work, was like, well, it's an emotional bid. No, it's not. It's worse than that. They want you to solve this internal dilemma, but it's not actually solvable. It's actually a trap.
Yeah.
You cannot do enough to prove to them. I mean, you could say, I love you, I promise I love you. And that's still like, yes, but you did this one thing. And that one thing says that you don't love me, but I love you. And but you can't prove it to them. That's the other really terrible part of this is that, so if you don't do anything, you've like confirmed that you're an unsupportive person, a unloving person. But if you move towards them, it's never enough. And by the end of it, you feel wrung out, exhausted, and probably still not successful.
Yeah. And I think that never enough, like that bottomless pit really stuck out to me too. And like, cause that was all early-ish. And, and then I was like, using the knowledge I have to put pieces together. But I remember even writing in my journal, like there's no amount of validation I could give this person for them to believe that like I'm here, but also I'm like I'm now running on empty, like I'm now running on empty. And if we don't know that we're dealing with this, I can really see and empathize. And I do see this in my clients where like relationships will go on for 6 years, 7 years, and then that person might end it. Like I had the borderline discard, but I think what happens a lot is like I see people leave because they don't always discard. I think that's people trying to leave and feeling like they can't because this person is putting all of the trauma on the table every single time. And it feels like if I leave, what's going to happen to them?
Well, yeah. And the fear is really real. I mean, they're the largest group that attempts suicide.
Yeah.
So and often there's multiple suicide gestures or passive death wishes that are mentioned, or it's used as leverage and a threat. But I want to back up to something else you said before I say more about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that what you're describing, that inability to sort of show up and soothe somebody, that's called low receptive capacity. I got to hear that from Dr. Lindsay Gibson. I just thought it was a brilliant way. So think of it this way. Every single person is a bowl, and in a way, and people pour into us. They give us their support, they give us admiration, they give us comfort, love, whatever it is that they're giving to us. Maybe it's attention. And all of us are not perfect bowls. We all have a few holes at the bottom, and so we're all leaky.
Yeah.
But these individuals are extremely leaky. Think of a colander, like when you're draining your noodles. It pours through them. So you can pour in, and it's pouring right out the bottom as fast as you're pouring in. That's low receptive capacity. So when I've been around someone like this, and by the way, narcissists are the same, histrionics are the same, borderlines, this whole, I wouldn't say antisocial personalities, they're probably this way, but around different things.
Yeah.
But has a low receptive capacity. And then that's my trigger to say to myself, Kerry, you can't fix this. There's no amount of you to fill this person. You're going to have to back up and protect yourself because you will be empty. They will deplete you. And the saddest part of a cluster B is when you're depleted, they're not going to look at you and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry you gave out on me. I'm so sorry I used you up." They're going to say, "See, you failed me."
Right. Exactly.
And then move on to the next person. So that's the other part, is that they never will see that. I kept thinking when I was in the middle of a relationship, oh, he's going to wake up and appreciate all that I've done. He's going to see what a burden this has been. He's going to show up and do this for me. No, it's never coming back towards you. They don't see that. If anything, they look at it and think, well, that was dumb on you for giving yourself all away. Why did you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like they, like after the discard, like they frame you as being pathetic when they created a situation that if you didn't care or wonder, like, oh, they're going to see everything I did and come back and see how patient I was. Like how you said, like if you could have changed him, you would. You were so patient, kind. You were willing to be flexible. You wanted him to get treatment, And for me, it was like I went through all this stuff because I was like, all right, he's in therapy, he's working on these things. But then it was like, you didn't love me enough. You didn't love me the right way. And
as if there was a cure, as if you withheld on purpose that cure.
And that I'm the cure, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But then I'm exhausted, right? And then it's like, well, you're
And by the way, if you could have been the cure, you would have done it because you did so much.
Right. So then I would say things like, well, I don't want to be the cure. Like I didn't say it in those words, but I would say it like, basically like I want you to find the healing the way you want to find healing, not through me. Because to me, that's real healing, when like I can talk to you about this, but I'm not the solution. I'm also not I'm not going to caretake the meltdowns. And it's that, I think it like creates that like push and pull where it's like, I need you to be that thing. And, but when it ended, because I want to touch on splitting, and this is probably like where we can explain that. But like when it ended, I kind of let it end. I was like, okay, I'm going to let him discard me, because I did try and end it and he was discarding. And I am downplaying it right now about like how emotional it was. It was so emotional and jarring. It was as if my brain left my body and I had to put it back inside again. But now I'm in retrospect and I'm like, okay, like I let it happen because it was so egregious. Everything that happened, I was like, I'm going to let this happen. Like he did a split. So I was now bad. And one of the things that he did was he was like, if you want to be in this relationship, is like in the breakup texts. It was like, he sent me a list of things I needed to do and that there was no turning back from it. And it was all like, accept my version of love. And I just remember reading it being like, you are a sick person. Like, I cannot believe I'm where is the mutuality in any of this? Of like, you need to accept my love is beautiful. And I'm like, your love, like in my head, I'm like, your love is suffocating, right? Like your love requires me to have sex when I'm injured because you've decided that like, that's how you feel close to me, not the other 3,000 ways that I've shown up for you.
Right.
Or you're too tired, but we're not going to talk about what you're doing that's making me tired, or exhausted. But like, I think so many people, and I've recently learned too, that like narcissists have a split too at times. It probably happens a lot earlier than a borderline, but like
it happens differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you could just explain what like splitting is, because I think people so many people experience it.
They do, and they don't even know they're experiencing it. It's crazy making too, because it makes you feel like so out of character of you that you feel violated by it.
Right.
When it's happening. So splitting, it's actually, I think it came out of Melanie Klein's work for anybody who cares. And she talked about it. And so grab hold of yourselves, you guys, because this is kind of bizarre, but it will make sense if you hear it. Talks about the good breast and the bad breast. So what she discovered as she was sort of thinking about this theoretically was that in infants, so we're going to go back to infants. In infants, when they are being cared for in a good way, in a loving way, in their mind, the world is like perfect. It's idyllic. It's like can't be better. And in that moment, there's the experience of the mother is the good breast. But when they get like something goes wrong, like you don't feed them fast enough, or they sit in their wet diaper too long and they get cold, or they're hungry, or whatever it is, suddenly the world goes into bad and they're enraged. And you see it. I mean, infants, if you could give the infant the power of an adult, they probably would, assassinate you on sight because
immediately.
Because you did not show up the way that, like suddenly the world is bad.
Well,
Everything is bad.
Right before we did this, my daughter and I, we were on a video chat and I did a hangman, and the phone kept freezing, and the rage in this child about wanting to murder me. And I'm like, this is not my fault.
No, and that's an experience of your experience. She was splitting, experienced you as splitting. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's where we start. That's our baseline. The world is, we see the world as either all perfect and good, or kind of, it's actually an illusion. It's not that good. But we see it all as all dark and evil, and it's really, really bad. Now, thankfully, most of us start to realize that things are not that simple. People are not that, the people are people. Even notice that Melanie Klein used the word breast. You didn't see the infant, didn't see the mother as mother. The infant saw the mother as an object to serve the infant's need. But as we get older, we start to realize that people are people. They're their own individuals. They have their own wants and desires and wishes, and that they can act separately from us. But we still, though, have holdover of it. And those of us who are not as well put together as other of us struggle. So hopefully we move to what's called ambiguity, where we are being able to see ambivalence. We can see that there is gray, and that everything is a mix of things, that they're both good and bad. Even in the good moments, there's sort of not so good things about it. But even in bad moments, there's probably some few good things in it. But not all of us get there. So if the character disturbed people, the group in the cluster B struggle with this, and they continue to use this very primitive, infantile defense mechanism called splitting, but it shows up differently. So in a narcissist, the splitting occurs with the love bombing and the devaluation. When they meet you, they think that you're the solution that they've been looking for. You're the love. This is going to be perfect. And there's sort of this, and they pull you into the fantasy of it with them, and you together buy this reality, but they don't really actually know you. They've created a caricature in their mind of you. And the minute they start to see that you're human, or that somehow you're less than, then you flip into the bad. And that's why often we feel this switch that happens, that we move from, oh my goodness, they said they love me and now they can't stand me and they, want to get rid of me. So it happens more at a larger level kind of way with a narcissist. I'm not saying they can't do it in the moment in the same way that the borderline can, but it's happening at a kind of this big story level. Now with the borderline though, they're very relationally based. They're very relationally motivated. A narcissist is not. A narcissist is after control and power. They don't really want intimacy with anybody. They want a connection for supply, and not being intimate and being deceptive is a way to protect themselves. So it's different. Whereas a borderline personality disorder person is relationship oriented. They want a connection. They are seeking intimacy with you, and there is an investment in the relationship. So what happens with them though is because they don't have the internal mechanism to deal with disappointment, and they don't have the impulse control, the control over their emotions very well. They don't deal with failure very well. They don't deal with loss, even like tiny little small losses that you describe of like, I got to go home, or no, I'm not interested in sex, or whatever it is. Because they don't have the internal mechanism to deal with those types of losses, then they split as a way to cope in that moment. They pull it out as a way to make sense of what's happening. And this is how it works. It's really sad, actually. So how it works is then you have to be bad for not doing whatever it is that you're doing. You must be wrong you must be something really inherently wrong with you. So they'll either attack you for failing them in some way, or they'll attack themselves. Like, I must not be lovable. I'm always the fuck up. I'm always the one that makes the big mistakes. And so then you rush in to rescue them. They'll make you the good one by you having it together, which is why you've rejected them. And they must be the bad because that's why the rejection is happening. Or they'll flip it and you're bad for rejecting them. How dare you do that? And that's where you see the rage, because they either will flip into sort of this incredibly self-destructive mode or incredibly enraged mode. And in the rage, they're sort of like, you're the bad, you did it. And they'll flail out at you, and they'll see themselves as they deserve that. And you didn't give that to them. But then the other thing that happens when this is all over, then there's usually some sort of it's usually like literally like a episode, and almost like they've had some kind of a like seizure of some kind. Well, when it's finally over and it calms down and the mood kind of dissipates, then there's this reckoning of, oh my goodness, what did I do? And then they move into a shame spiral and again, it sort of cycles again. I'm so bad that I did that. How could I have done that? And then there's, effort to sort of like try to repair and the love bombing you again. So that's how it kind of looks, but it's really different with a borderline personality trait.
Yeah. You mentioned like the two ways it could go. I'm so bad or you're so bad. And like that can happen with the same person,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be, that's like one of those things that I think makes us like us survivors feel really crazy because you have such a hard time tracking the pattern, what's going on or recognizing what's actually going on. And then,
and the other problem is that there's not learning from it,
right. And then if they're feeling remorseful, like what you said, like,
right.
They realize after.
Which you think will lead to the learning, but it doesn't.
Yeah. And in that relationship, that's what actually got him into it was like, he did it so many times in a short period. And then I said like, look, he was seeing like a therapist at a community center. And I was like, I think you need to find a trauma therapist that understands, these things and really do some deep work. And he said, okay. And then did that. That all got weaponized on me. That's a whole other episode. But but that was the remorse part. Then it stopped actually, because now he was rationalizing all the reasons as to why he did it and how I need to be different when he's having these outbursts, which is absolutely not what I signed up for. And not,
right.
And I actually love Lindsay Gibson's work. I know you mentioned Dr. Lindsay Gibson. I love her work. And she talks about emotional immaturity and emotional immature parents. And like, I remember I had read her book before, and it's talking about in a relationship with an emotional immature person, here are some of the qualities. And that's how borderline will present in those moments of here are all the things that, they're lashing out on you. And then over time, I would say probably the last 4 months or so, there was no actual remorse, even though there was the same breakdowns. Now, maybe this was part of the narcissism coming in a little bit for him to be like, I'm right. I talked to my therapist about it. I was right about that, and I'm sitting back wondering, all I did was ask you if you got quarters for laundry that you told me you were going to get. You didn't get them. I have 2 minutes. This really happened. I have 2 minutes to run to the store. I really, because, banks are open certain hours. I really don't have more than, and then I'm getting in trouble for asking for quarters because I'm reminding him that he didn't do something. I'm like, but I didn't know that you didn't do it. I just wanted the quarters. But now my whole humanity is being broken down because now you feel rejected and incompetent, which was not my goal, but that's how he was going to see it anyway.
Yeah. It's amazing how they use justification right away and the rationalization. I mean, they'll often just wipe it off the counter as if it was nothing. The other thing I caught in your story was he triangulated on you too. And we often miss that. I mean, they're bringing in the therapist in as a way, as sort of like a credibility witness. What he essentially was saying, I'm right. See, I called mom into the room and she says I'm right too. So you're wrong. Well, that doesn't, first of all, therapists aren't there. They don't see what's happening. They're only hearing that person's version of something. And that doesn't make them right about the situation. And on top of it, it's signaling this person in themselves doesn't feel like they have enough power to stand on their own 2 feet to say, I didn't like that.
Yeah, I ended up having to say over time, her name was Pat. I was like, I don't care what Pat said. Pat knows me. Pat knows my story vis-a-vis you. You weren't around for my upbringing. I don't give a crap what Pat says, but I'm so glad you pointed out triangulation, because I literally said it to a client this week. I said, she's triangulating here. Like the woman was doing it with the church.
Yeah.
I talked to this person, in a church, it could be leaders, it could be community, it could be, anybody.
Your past self.
Right.
You didn't do that before. Why are you doing it now?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's another form of triangulation.
And I said, I was like, what she's doing here is she's triangulating. There's always this other, but also I think this is probably cluster B broadly, not just borderline. They'll triangulate with like this invisible other, like the choir that they made up that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah,
Like,
right. Everybody else agrees with me, or nobody else would ever do this.
right. And you're like,
How do you know that? Did you take a
yeah,
survey?
I know. Did you go like, please show me the results? Because like,
And the bottom line is it still misses the bigger point. And the bigger point is, and this is what's key in every relationship,
mhm.
what should matter is what matters to that person in that moment. Period. End of story. It doesn't really matter if the whole of the world doesn't agree. If you say today that you really want to put, I don't know, let's be super ridiculous, blue dye in the corn that you're serving for dinner tonight, nobody else would do that. Who cares? If you want to do it and it's not harming anybody, you should be able to do it.
Right. Right. But then, so like, I think so many people would then say like, okay, but they're harming me, or like, but so like, what would be the differentiation between like their version of that and like a healthy person's version of that?
Meaning back to the fact that can you give me an example?
Yeah. Like I want to put like, say it's like the abuser is like, we only eat corn with blue dye.
Okay. Then
This
you
is
can
the
say,
way
well,
that
I would prefer you then hold my corn out and not dye it. And I don't care if you dye yours.
Yeah.
What happens is, see, this is what's typical of cluster B is they get rigid and inflexible.
Right. Right.
They'll say, no, but you need to eat it this way. You haven't tried it. That's why you don't know it's good. You just need to try it. Like, I don't want to try it. And can you respect the fact that I don't want to try it? Well, my therapist says that everybody, you know what I'm saying? And it just becomes this big, because what was happening in that example is you are being ignored. You're being silenced and your needs and wants and desires are being completely run over.
Right. And it sounds like you're not able to say, I don't want this and have that respected. Where
Exactly.
like, if you said, I'm going to put blue in the corn today, and they said, I really don't want blue, you'd probably be like, all right, I'll leave one out.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
a different response.
We have a rule in my house. My kids and I, my adult sons and I are extremely close. And every Friday, we do what's called a dinner and a movie. And it's been a many-year tradition now. And we're all autistic. And we've got some quirkiness about how we like things. And one of us doesn't like to start a new series when we haven't finished the old series. So say, for example, maybe a new series has started and we haven't wrapped up the other one. This person has asked us, one of my sons has asked, will you please wait to start the new until we wrap up the old? Now, we could all say, what's the difference? It doesn't hurt you that we start another series. But our rule is, if one of us doesn't want to do it, then we don't do it.
Yeah. Well, it's grounded in respect. Yeah.
Exactly. Because his feelings matters. And just like I want him to think my feelings matter. And that's what a healthy relationship looks like.
That's such a good point. And that's such a good example, right? It's like, okay, no, we don't have to do that because the feelings matter. In the same way that I'm sure if you were like, I'm really like, that other show like gave me a nightmare. Like, I think I need 1 week break. He'd be like, okay, I understand.
Exactly. In fact, recently we did do that. And I looked over at him and said, are you okay with it? He goes, no, I'm okay with this. But we checked in, so I remembered and I checked in instead of, nobody made fun of anybody. Nobody talked anybody out of it. That's what we often go wrong is just learning just to hold space for each other, even when we don't agree and it doesn't make sense to us. It doesn't need to make sense to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I just noticed the time. It went so fast. And then I just like looked at my questions quickly and like, actually you just answered one in that example, it's because I was going to ask like, how do you know the difference between someone who won't do the work plus someone who can? That's it.
Watch for repair. When you bring up an issue that's wrong, do they circle back and check in? Do they hear you? Do they value with what you said? And is there effort to actually make it different without making you feel small? That to me is a sign of a healthy relationship.
Yeah. What would you, and this might have even come up in your community, what would you say to someone who's still waiting for the healthy version, in air quotes, of the person to show up or to come back or to appear?
Yeah, that's a tough one. If I hear enough of a character disturbance in that individual, I would probably say, how do you know that wasn't a manipulation that you first saw?
Yeah. Okay.
It's because that's the really hard part is that there are people, and let's be really honest for a moment. When you go on the first date, are they meeting your raw, authentic, most vulnerable self? No, it's a sale. Jessica, you're making a sale. Please pick me. Well, we all do that, but people who have character disturbances really are doing it. It's on steroids, and it's so severe. They're showing up as what you want. They're trying to get into your head and figure that out. So you can't get that person back because the person was never really based on any. It wasn't authentic. This was just a mirage, or it was a facade. It was a veneer. This was a piece of furniture. It was a veneer. So that's the hard part, is to recognize a lot of the good that we originally experienced in a toxic relationship was actually not authentic. It was an illusion, and let it go. That's where I say grief work is so important to really to process that.
Yeah. And grief work around the person you thought they were, that they presented. Because to your point, they mirror what they think you want to see. They show up that way until they can't, which is usually about 3 months, 90 days in, if not less than that.
Yeah, or until they somehow have gotten you locked in some way. Usually they're looking for, if the more predatory they are, the more they're going to be watching for this. Yeah. Usually they'll ask you to compromise yourself on something, and they'll see you betray yourself, and they'll know, oh, I got this person. Or they're looking for some life event that they know that's made it very hard for you to leave. So then they can start to relax because they know that the exit has just gotten way more difficult to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. And in your book, it's really amazing how you detail the financial stuff.
Yeah. And then for me, you can see it was on the honeymoon.
Right.
The mask just collapsed right on the honeymoon.
Right.
He let it go, so.
Yeah, exactly. But at the beginning, when he's showing up and taking flights and wanting to see you, and, actions and words are aligning, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it starts, like you said, to it collapse.
It does collapse.
I've mentioned your book a bunch. I'll make sure to put the link in the show notes.
Yeah. It's called Love You More, The Harrowing Tale of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross. Yeah. It had quite a story. I'm so thankful I'm out and safe.
Yeah, I know. Me too. Yeah, especially when you get to the end. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. I don't want to give away for people. I could keep going for a long time, but I guess my last question, I feel like I owe it to the listeners to really ask something about the capacity when we think of cluster B. And you and I, you touched on all of them in this episode. But if we, just for the sake of the time and everything, if we think about capacity, what does a capacity actually mean in the context of disordered people? And if it's easier to answer with narcissism or borderline, because we understand those a little, I think, the wider world understands them a little bit better. But when you introduced yourself today, you talked about all the changes that you made in your career, and you've done a few episodes with me. So I've also seen so you're always in a place of this change. And I'm always in a place of change. They really are not in a place of change.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if you could explain the capacity aspect.
Yeah, I like to think of cluster Bs. I like to think of all of us as sort of like a foundation, a house foundation. And the reason my late husband was a civil engineer and was in construction. So I got to know a lot about buildings and what's important about a good building. And to build something, you need a firm, stable, flat foundation. The problem is for us as adults, that's ego strengths and ego functions. And those include things like ability to have insight into yourself, ability to be caring and thoughtful and sensitive to other people, called empathy, and the ability to resist impulses. Like if you want to have that third bowl or second bowl of ice cream, and maybe a bowl of ice cream, you're going to say no. Just to be able to practice good things. You get upset, something goes wrong, it fails, you know how to pull yourself out of the dark pit of shame or pain or whatever feeling that you're having. These are all ego strengths. And all of us are weak and strong in different various ones. So we maybe do really well in some and not do so great at others. But what happens with a character disturbant individual, which is all of cluster B, is that they're weak on the critical ones that have to do with life skills and relationship skills. They're weak in empathy. They're not very self-reflective. They really struggle to know how to connect with other people and be intimate. They suck at emotional modulation, which is controlling their emotions. They often have extreme problems with impulse control. And these make it very hard for you to work and to have a good love life. It makes you a very difficult person to be around because that makes you act out, get rageful, get addicted to stuff, do stuff that's hurtful, create chaos. They create a lot of chaos. And so I like to think of that. So think of a person when you meet them as how good of a foundation do they have in their life? Are they able to hold jobs? Do they take criticism well? Are they kind to other people? And what you'll see is that healthier people do most of the time better in those areas, and less healthy people don't do so well or are very inconsistent in those areas. And I think it's really hard because we end up thinking, well, we often mistaken state situations like they're hungry or tired or had a long day. We see these behaviors. They'll say, that's why this happened, because in my case, it would be why it happened. I might get sharp with somebody because I'm really, really hungry, but I normally am not an irritable person. But we often will see these low capacity, these kind of damaged areas and say, oh, they had a bad day, or they'll frame it that way. But notice the pattern. You'll see that this person, like, for example, my ex changed jobs every year and a half. He couldn't hold a job.
Yeah.
I was his fifth wife, Jessica. So, I mean, he wasn't maintaining relationships. You know, you can see this repeated pattern of failure. And even though they may package really well, and I tell you, if you meet him, you like him. He looks good. He dresses good. He's a handsome guy. He makes great first impressions. But look at the package. Look at the pattern. I'm sorry. Yeah, don't look at the package. Look at the pattern. Notice what's happening in this person's life. You're going to see problems with law or not dealing with their adult children very well. You're going to see a lot of discarded relationships. You'll see a lot of relationship churning that's happening. You'll see just failure and struggles with work, or people not liking them at work, or them being rude and inconsiderate to those who they see beneath themselves. So those are the things to watch for. I hope I answered the question. Was that what you're hoping to get at?
Yeah. I think it's just such a hard thing to wrap your mind around. And so what I was looking for, and which is what you gave me, is they like, what does that mean? Because like we have different capacity, and what I gathered from the answer is that like you'll see that they won't have that capacity. And like the dysregulation is such a core characteristic, I think, too, is like, do they have the ability to get them, it's not based on like the state of their life or this thing. It's that they really do not even think they want to change, or that they need.
Yeah. They've justified why they do it. It's for other reasons. But here's the two things I would watch for. Watch for how they handle conflict. That's going to tell you a lot. And then watch how they handle failure.
Yeah.
Those are the two areas that they don't do well with. You'll see them act out around it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for unpacking this with me.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed it. I always enjoy these conversations. They're always so rich.
Yeah. I always appreciate having you because you explain the psychology in such a digestible way, I think. And then also, like, you've experienced it and you've helped survivors. So you have such a unique perspective on all of it. And I just really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Can you tell everybody where to find you? And I will make sure to put out all the notes in the show notes.
Sure. So the best place to go is my website. It's kerrymcavoyphd.com. But my social handle is the same everywhere. So whether you're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. And by the way, I go live every week on YouTube, and it's Kerry McAvoy PhD. So you can find me, kerrymcavoyphd.com or Kerry McAvoy PhD everywhere.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kerry. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.